Hi. We would like to give a warm welcome to Marta Bogdanska, a Polish photographer, visual artist and filmmaker. She will talk about her book, exhibition and ongoing project, Shifters.
Thank you so much. Hello everyone, I'm Marta and I'm super happy you're here. Thank you for coming. Yes, I'm going to talk about my project Shifters. A small exhibition is here in the spread section in the back. And I really want to thank also Landskrona Photo for inviting me here and also being a co-publisher of the book. So thank you Jenny Linde and thank you Jenny Norquist. So this project is actually a long trip, and it's a big project with a lot of layers. I hope I can cover at least some of them. The presentation in the background is not really so much, I mean, it's just the background. So you can see different elements of the project, but I'm not going to talk about each slide directly. I will talk about different elements, and you can see some of them in the presentation. So it will repeat on a loop at some point. This project started already several years ago. Actually, the first spark for it, I think it was in 2015 or 16, so quite a long time ago. I used to live in Lebanon, in Beirut, and somehow there I started coming across articles about animals accused of spying. And it was just, for me, like a very curious situation. Like these articles were not very deep. They usually were written by Western journalists, so it was also for me an interesting aspect to look into this kind of post-colonial discourse as well, because what they did usually is they picked up some stories from the Middle East or Asia or Africa, and they just wrote a translation to English, French, saying that a pigeon flew from Pakistan to India and was suspected of being an agent, for example. And there was usually in these articles, there were not much background or context. Only a few of them would mention some kind of Western involvement with animals in the military and war machine or in CIA spy programs. So that was a very important spark for me. I started gathering all these articles, and it became apparent that there was some kind of ridiculing and mocking gesture in it. So I wanted to actually a little bit counter this notion of animals being used in war, and this is how it started. I started researching archives in 2018, and I didn't know what I was getting into actually, because probably all of us, we heard like a story of one animal, a horse. In Poland we have a very famous, I'm a Polish artist, so in Poland we have a very famous bear that used to fight in the Second World War. His name was Wojtek, and kind of it's a story that we know, but I didn't understand how vast and how deep was this subject when I started researching archives. And my approach to this project from the beginning was to research internet. I mean, I was interested in seeing how this kind of knowledge that I was also discovering, so it's like the project is kind of my own journey as well, starting from this curious point, oh wow, you know, how can animals be spies, how does it work? And getting deeper, so the project kind of follows the same path as I followed. So I started in the internet, and then I decided that it's actually mostly interesting for me to see what kind of images are there in this repository of images, which internet is, and how they are narrated, who's posting them, what kind of archives there are. And this is when I found out that there is really a lot of them, but mostly they function in some Pinterest collections or like small personal collections. Lots of times it's anecdotal or funny, or it's like, oh look how a sweet little donkey is here on a hammock in a war zone. And at the same time, in my own process, I started reading more and more about animals in war, but also animal studies, theories, post-materialists, philosophical texts that are dealing with like post-anthropocentric perspectives. So it kind of started getting deeper and deeper for me. And I also discovered at that time Eric Baratte. I don't know if you know him. He's a very well-established French historian, and he, since 12 years, I think. He works in Lyon, he has his own team, and he coined the concept of history from animal perspective. And this was like a kind of a revelation for me when I discovered his work in 2019. And that kind of guided the project as well very much, because I realized that I'm doing a similar thing in a visual way. He's a historian, so he writes mostly, and he uses archives in a very scientific way. I use them a little bit differently. I allow myself for different diversions and allegories. So I actually met Eric, and he actually wrote a preface for my book later on. But his work was super important, and for me it was also very important because it's this rewriting of history, and he's placing his project, his historiosophical project, in a bigger context, of course, of the feminist rewriting of histories and post-colonial rewriting of history. So it's a kind of the same gesture, the same movement that we're trying to bring back this forgotten, or at least kind of transparent or not well narrated stories. And at the same time, I was building my own archive from these internet images, and I wasn't really focusing on quality images in the sense how we see like, oh, we need to have like super good image, which is like 30 megabytes. I really just took everything there was. Like, it was interesting for me to see how also these bad images, they're called by Ito Steyerl. She has this text called In Defense of Poor Image, and she writes there about the power of these weak images on the internet, which are copies of copies, and we don't know where the original is and who has the rights. And so I was interested in all this also, and building an archive from this kind of images. And so I did. So the archive is actually bigger than a book, but also from the beginning, I had the book in mind. I wanted a project to become a book. It's bigger than a book, but the book is heart of it. And I knew that I don't want to select images. I want to like reduce selection to the minimum. And actually, when we were finally printing last year with the Foundation for Visual Arts and Landskrona Photo, my only kind of restriction was the size given to me by the printer. So if I could, I would actually print it bigger. But at some point, he said, "No, Marta, this is it. 850 pages. We can't do more this time." So the book has 14 chapters. They are kind of some more poetic, some more direct, about different types of usage of animals in military, in spy programs, in wars. So you have a chapter about Red Cross dogs and this kind of mercy dogs. You have a chapter on special gear that was designed for animals, making them more than like some kind of hybrids even. Lots of different stories. And I also collaborated with several writers, because in my research, I also gathered a lot of text, and that was a problematic situation because a lot of these texts were just articles, but also stories, biographies of animals, which was super interesting for me as well. It's another aspect that I sometimes try to show in exhibitions, because in the book it was not so possible. So we had all this text, which would make probably 10 new books, actually, if we wanted to use the text. And we couldn't do that. So from the beginning, I thought it would be nice to work with a writer, actually. And so Stefan Lorenzuti, who's a great poet and a writer, actually, he was an editor, and at some point he said, "Look, I can actually maybe write some text for the book." And I was like, yes, that's perfect. And he did, so we discussed. He also invited 3 other writers, and we selected maybe not even some topics, sometimes a story that I felt was interesting, but the texts kind of have their own life. So they are not illustrative 100% to the chapters. Sometimes they tell something that's not really visible, sometimes they talk about only one photo. For example, I discovered a photo by Edward Muybridge. You know the Animal Locomotion famous series, but there is a last photo, which is a plate 781. And maybe I can, oh yeah, actually it opened. Maybe I can just show it. And so basically in this photo, what he did, he had a group of chicken, and he threw a torpedo between the chickens and recorded in his, sequence manner how the chickens were scared, afraid of the torpedo. And it's actually even called Chickens Afraid of a Torpedo. A torpedo used to be, in the 19th century, it was not only an underwater missile, it used to be a a small explosive, right? I think so, in English at least. And I found this photo, for example, and I thought this story is fascinating because what happened afterwards is when he took this photo, he put down his camera and he never again took a photograph. So we can ask whether it's a coincidence or or maybe he thought, what the fuck did I do, you know, like who could have come with this idea, you know? Maybe I crossed the line, and he became a gardener, actually. Then he invented some other things, so I thought, so for example, there is a story about that, so it's only talking about this photo, but I find it super important and super interesting because for me, Muybridge and people like similar to him in the second half of 19th century are like the fathers of modern photography, and then because of what he did with animal locomotion and how he photographed the animals and their movement, I think this all is possible. Like the war, how we use animals, like he created the background for us to be able to understand how animals move, how they behave, so we can use them in these most efficient ways and build these gears for them and change them into these almost sometimes robot machines that work for us. So yeah, another aspect which is super important in this project is this invisible or transparent or forgotten work of animals. And that's why I wanted also the book to be so heavy, so you actually, when you take it, you feel the burden of it, you know, it's like palpable. You take it and it's there, you're like, oh my God. And that's why I didn't want the selection, I wanted these repetitions, and so you look at these images and the book is built in this way that first you're like attracted to the stories, but I think while you get more and more into it, you get the horror of it. And then also you, hopefully that was my intention, you start feeling the materiality and the physicality of animals. Because we are so used to using animals as metaphors as well. I mean, our language is filled with metaphors about animals and animal life, and so I think every language has that. So I think what also Eric Barater writes about is like bringing back the physical body of the animal, and for us to look at it and to understand that it's going through pain, through emotions, through different experiences. And I hope that somehow, of course I know there are a lot of problems with this kind of work when you're trying to bring back the story of someone, like some beings that you can't like talk to, and you can't have documents that they actually left, because animals have not left any documents. So we're all like making some kind of appropriations and like just trying to get things. But I think it's still worth as a, yeah, I can take it, as a kind of metaphorical tryout. If you have the background of thinking, okay, I have to be careful, I have to put all these doubts in me and understand maybe how it works. And also, I wanted the book to look like kind of this novel, like cheap novel that, you know, it's cheap, like the paper is super thin, it's a little bit like newspaper paper. I wanted it to have that feeling of the book that you read and then kind of you forget quickly, you know, like these kind of long novels that, crime stories, pulp fiction. So that was kind of in the background when I designed the book. I actually designed it myself. I'm completely not a graphic designer, but I made 2 dummies before we got to the final maquette for the printing. And from the beginning, I have to say that the initial like design stayed. We didn't really change much. I mean, I added chapters, it became bigger. We changed the paper a little bit, but like the cover, which was also completely at the beginning intuitively chosen, and the shape and how I thought about it, it's kind of stayed with us, repetitions of images. So it was interesting that there was no other idea of how to present this work, actually. It just kind of presented itself to me, and then I thought, okay, it didn't change in the 3 years of the process of working on it. And also the cat, Brunhilde, I found this photo in the Library of Congress. It's from like 1915 or 1914, sorry, I can't remember now. And the only description it has is that it's a cat called Brunhilde, dressed in a Viking's armor and helmet. And then at some point, when we were working on one of the exhibitions last year with my 2 great curators, I had a solo show in Warsaw, and before that in Kraków Photo Month, we started researching certain things, and because we were interested in this parallel you know, bringing back the feminist history or the women history and the animal stories. We thought this could be a good kind of a line in the exhibition. So we researched also Brunhilde, and maybe some of you know, but Brunhilde is actually one of the Valkyrias from the Nordic mythology, and she used to be like the most famous Valkyria, and Wagner wrote an opera about her, and she has lots of meanings. So somehow this cat that I chose in a way intuitively became like a big guide for this whole project, and we talk about her a lot, and she shows up in many exhibitions. And to give some more reference maybe for this work, I mean, I talked about Barate, I talked about Ito Steyer, and of course the archive as a build-up tool of power as well. Like Gloria Oyarzabal said before, that museums are not neutral and they're built by powerful structures. It's the same with archives, of course. So for me it was interesting to also look at archive as something that I can try to dismantle or shake a bit or steal sometimes even, you know, like, and build my own and see what happens after that. You know, it's all available, you can all find this, but then I'm taking it and trying to kind of put it together and give it a new meaning. So there was this aspect as well. And then there is, of course, a little bit of Foucault in it, because I'm interested in the biopolitics and how the subject is formed. And here, with the term shifters, which comes from shapeshifters, which is a term that on one hand stems back to mythology, where we have all the gods that turn into trees or animals or humans, and they can turn back and forth. But it's also a very significant term in today in culture, like pop culture. Like it became super like famous or present in universe of films and books and fantasy. We have all these werewolves and shapeshifters. So for me, that term from the beginning somehow also came to my mind. I didn't know exactly what the project is going to be about, but the term was in my head. And then I realized that it was actually very, very proper term, because when you look at the agent, the spy, the agent, on one hand, it's of course the spy that can spy on something, but then on the other hand, it's a subject in philosophy. The agent has agency, it's a subject doing action. So that already very quickly allowed me to look at this historical research and tie it to the very contemporary ways of thinking about animal intentionality, subjectivity, and agency. So the term, so this shifters word kind of also refers to that, and also to hopefully some kind of mystery behind animal actions that we don't understand 100%. And as you can see, I'm showing also a little bit of different ways we were presenting the project until now, because as the project is really vast, and there's lots of themes and topics and ways you can actually look at it. So somehow every time I work on an exhibition or a showcasing of the project, I try to find a new way to show it, a new kind of topic or theme. And also in this project, apart from the book, I made a 12-minute video essay, which is a little bit more my personal subjective kind of take on animal agency. And it combines footage, also archival footage, and the footage that I took with animals, and also I gave animals camera, and they shot something themselves. And it's interwoven with some important texts from contemporary philosophy, like Donna Haraway or Eduardo Kohn. Oh, and last thing, I wanted to go back to Foucault, which is the biopolitics. And I think for me, I realized that in the case of animals, actually, we are executing this biopolitical power to the extreme. I mean, it's like we train them, we use them, and we shape their bodies. I mean, if you look at the how the breeds of different animals were changed in the end of 19th century and 20th, they look completely different. So we're like really using this biopolitical power in a very extreme way, and I thought it's like also a very important theme, kind of, I hope, going through the book. So there is a video essay as well that I try to show as much as possible, and I also wanted to have a participatory or collaborative kind of component of the project. So I do sound workshops. I usually invite like a sound artist, and together we work with participants, and they come up with sound stories. We call them sound stories because they're quite experimental and they're very different. They depend on the group, they depend on what they're interested in. I give them a selection from my archive and they choose several photos and they create like a short sound piece for it. And we help them with post-production and everything. It's usually like 1 minute, 2 minutes long. And a lot of them are quite actually intense and sometimes super scary. I'm not a musician, I have nothing to do with music, but I found that sound, in many ways, is able to tell much more than an image sometimes. And at least me, for example, maybe I don't have so many cliches with sound. And I found that people, who, at least the ones who joined the workshops, they were super excited and they felt that it was giving them a new way to express certain things. And also we can actually incorporate the animal sounds, you know, that otherwise it's not so easy. In a visual project we can't. So I do like this component, and actually two of these sound pieces are in the exhibition here, so you can listen to them. Yeah, and the project, I mean, it's kind of like done, but in a way, like every time I'm doing an exhibition, it's not over. So we'll see what happens. Yeah, I guess that's it for my introduction.
Thank you for your interesting and unique lecture. Maybe the audience has some questions as well? No? Okay, thank you. Oh, you have a question.
Hi. No, I thought it was interesting that you talked about the biography of the animals, and I was wondering if that's not something that came into the book. Is that something that you might be working on?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Or if there are other chapters that you kind of couldn't include?
Okay, so this again comes from Eric Barate. He's a big source of inspiration in this project because one of his last books was actually called Animal Biographies, and he chose 10 very specific animals and tried to describe their life, but not in a way that's been done before. You know, we have this kind of stories where you write about animal life. Like there was a famous warhorse story. The book is called The Warhorse. I think it's a British book. But he's trying to really be not only a historian, but a zoologist and ethnologist, like trying to understand the feelings and the emotions and the experiences that the animals had. So for example, he's describing a biography of a first giraffe that came to France, actually somewhere in the middle of 19th century, and it was not the first try to get the giraffe from Africa, actually, but they always died. And actually, this giraffe was traveling with another giraffe in the same ship, so they took the same road, and the other giraffe died. So he also like looks at this idea of, we're always in science, I'm talking about science, we always look at genre, you know, it's always the horses, it's always the cows, we rarely look at the individual animals, and he's trying to kind of change that idea in science, that we can also look at individual animals and see their stories and their individual characteristics, their, you know, them being subjects, and why, for example, this giraffe survived and the other didn't. So this is where it came from, and I mean, what I do, it's not really directly in the book, but if you look at some photos, and if you would be interested, we described some of the animals in them. Like, for example, there is a bulldog called Stubby, and he has a quite developed story, or there is a baboon called Jackie from New Zealand. He has also a very developed story. So there is a little bit of that, but I didn't really delve much into it, but I do it in exhibition if there is space. So we did it, for example, in Kraków Photo Month and in Institute for Photography Fort, it's in Warsaw, it's a gallery. We did actually create new audio stories that are trying to tell this animal biography in a way. But it's something that I have not really done yet so much, and I don't know, we'll see, maybe it will go this direction.
Hi. Very interesting project. I'm just wondering, have you thought about exploring how animals are used in memes for humans to express their feelings and thoughts?
Personally, no, I didn't. I was kind of interested in the history of it, so I had to somehow draw the line. So first line for me, yes, I should mention this. It's only about Western use of animals, because I felt like it's not my place to try to look into Asia or Africa or Middle East or North Africa. I mean, this is the only times that these regions show up in the book is because the Western armies are there. You know, like let's say the British invade Egypt, and or they go to Egypt, so that's when Egypt is there. But I would not dare to understand how these cultures were using animals. So this was. Yeah, I know, but I'm just answering why I didn't use memes and why I didn't go to that very contemporary way of looking at animals and using animals. Because that was my decision, that I only look from the West, and then I wanted to, I stopped in 1970s, more or less. Because there was a moment when I was working on the book, it was in September 2019, that CIA decided to make public a big selection of their documents and materials called Animal Partners. And these are projects that actually you can go online, just write cia.gov something, and basically you can access now all these documents that were not public, that were secret before. And they talk about programs that CIA had with animals from like after the Second World War until the 70s. So I thought, okay, this will be kind of my more or less date. Yeah, so I also didn't dwell so much on the Korean War and Vietnam War. Some of the topics I didn't touch too much. So I'm not saying, this is what I'm saying, I'm not a scientist here, you know, like it is a little bit of my own selection and my own process.
Thank you.
Thank you.